This week on To the Contrary.
First, the state of lesbian rights after a Utah judge's controversial ruling on foster care. Then, young women living with mom and dad at record levels. Behind the headlines, we talk to the director of the new movie, Suffragette.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, LGBT rights.
A married lesbian couple plans to fight a judge's order that they give up their foster child. A Utah judge ordered the removal of the 1-year-old from their household because he says there's research showing children do better when they're raised by heterosexual couples. Becky Pierce and April Hoagland became licensed as foster parents after the U.S. Supreme Court ruling affirming same-sex marriage. With the support of the biological mother, the couple planned to adopt the foster child and raise her with the couple's 2 biological children.
So, Rea Carey, what does the Utah judge's ruling say about the status of the Supreme Court's ruling upholding gay marriage?
Well, interestingly, it actually doesn't speak to the Supreme Court's ruling on marriage. It speaks more to Judge Johansson's ignoring the best interest of the child and ignoring the vast body of research that shows that children are just as well off whether they have same-sex parents or opposite-sex parents.
Bonnie, it says one thing to me, and it can be summed up in 2 words: judicial activism. And that's dangerous.
This case is a clear case of judicial ignorance, where the Utah judge has completely misinterpreted the law established by the Supreme Court of the United States.
When the Supreme Court mandated same-sex marriage across the country, it cut off democratic debate about this important institution. So it's not surprising that the implications of this cultural change are still being worked out, especially when it comes to children.
And will they be for a long time to
I think
come?
that we're going to have a lot of debate. It is a reasonable view that many people have held that children deserve to be raised by a mom and a dad. And that is something that should be respected. So my major concern going forward is how will people who believe that marriage is the union of a man and a woman, that children deserve the chance to be raised by a mother and father, how will they be treated in our society?
So it kind of reminds me, quite frankly, of the Bolshevik Revolution, which after 1917 it took place in Moscow, but the Tsar's army and the Bolsheviks were fighting out across Russia for 3 or 4 years afterwards. Is that what we're going to see?
Well, we've seen significant progress across this country, specifically on marriage equality, and that's what's happening in Utah. This couple is married. They're legally married. They have followed the legal process to both foster and hopefully adopt their daughter. And we will see that conversation playing out across the country. But it is the law of the land now that same-sex couples are able to get married.
But should it send a signal? I guess my open question I meant to ask. Should this send a signal that all is not great for gay, lesbian, queer, whatever, transgender couples, despite that rule? In other words, the public reaction was, wow, they've made it. Okay, they're there. They're not there.
No, and there's a long way to go. This case certainly shows us this. There are still many hearts and minds to change, to catch up with the law in some ways. And there's still challenges that people face, unfortunately, across the country as they're simply trying to put together their family.
But is there room for debate on this? Is there, I'm concerned about the other side of the coin, where child welfare organizations run by religious organizations have been driven out of their service in foster care and adoption because they have the conviction that they want to place children with a mother and a father. There should be room in our pluralistic society for that. And yet in Boston and Washington, D.C. and in Illinois, those religious organizations have had to get out of serving children altogether. When we have so many children with so many needs, let's allow a diversity of providers and protect the religious liberty of groups like that.
But the mother in this case supported the not just foster care, but ultimate adoption of that child.
So this particular case will work its way out in the court of law. I think we're all at a distance, and nobody's seen the judge's opinion. It'll work itself out in the legal process, but we need to have a conversation about what we're going to do with dissenting perspectives in the society. There should be room for debate.
And I think it's important to point out, if you look at the history of civil rights in our country, whenever there is a national right established by the federal government, there are often local efforts to restrict that right. It happened in the case of voting rights, where you had states enacting poll taxes and literacy tests and other barriers to voting rights. It's happened with abortion rights after Roe v. Wade, where you have
continues
states.
to happen.
Yes,
to abortion
and now
rights.
it's happening with LGBT rights. Now, how will that conflict between the federal law and the local law resolve itself? Well, I have confidence in the words of Martin Luther King, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
Interesting. Ray, are you surprised? Is it surprising that this was a lesbian couple that this first judge lashed out at, as opposed to two gay men?
It could have been either. I think this is a case not as much about the couple, but really about the judge not misjudging, if you will, the best interest of the child, that even the Division of Child and Family Services, the experts in this case, stand behind their decision to place the child. They themselves are seeking a stay in this order so that this baby girl can stay with his family.
Well, should the LGBTQ movement now be focusing on changing federal laws so that discrimination against gays in any form is illegal, as opposed to now there's no federal law that bars discrimination in workplace, in whatever, for LGBTQ.
The focus should be there, but I don't think there should be a shift. I'm a strong believer in states' rights, and we saw something happen in North Carolina, which was pretty epic. The people spoke, and they reversed a decision on same-sex marriage. I think what's important to look at here in Utah, and not to get trigger-happy on policy changes here, is that the Republican Governor Herbert has said that this decision has puzzled him, that this judge should follow the law, even though he doesn't agree with it. So what we're seeing here was this case, I hope, an isolated case of judicial activism. And in our democracy, that's very dangerous, could set a very dangerous precedent. So I hope the movement remains focused on changing federal discrimination laws, but also remains focused on states' rights as well.
But you just mentioned, I mean, all these new laws, progress, some would say, there's kickback against them. There are people who don't agree and feel like they were forced into a situation and fight against it. How long do you think that will take to play out?
Well, I think that the LGBT movement is smart to make a push for the Equal Rights Act at the same time, because that's putting the pressure on in a different way. As the states try to restrict the right, then you have the movement trying to push the right forward. So I think that is a very smart move. But if you look at this question, I mean, would a judge ever rule that an African-American family couldn't adopt a white child? Absolutely not. That would be ridiculous. So it is a real stretch here to say that an LGBT family can't adopt a child.
The social science on this question is very much debated, and the most recent and rigorous studies continue to affirm what decades of social science have said, and that is that children tend to do best when they are raised by their married biological parents, mother and father, and that is significant.
Really?
So,
I've seen studies. There was one that came out about 5 years ago that showed that gay parents were better parents.
That was a convenience sample. It was not a sample that has relation to the population at large. So when we see population-based samples, we see confirmation of what decades of social science research have said. So this is debated, and you cannot say that the Supreme Court based its decision on settled science. Therefore, it is a reasonable conclusion to ask questions about the best interests of the children. States should be free to make child welfare policy on the best interests of the child, and to continue to debate. We shouldn't silence any of this. We should be able to debate on our experience, what we've heard from others, and what the research says. No one should be silenced on that ground.
Well, we can look at the research, and just this June there was an overarching study of 19,000 pieces of research and articles on this very subject that found overwhelmingly that children of same-sex couples have no differences in their lives, in health indicators or otherwise, other than with other types of families. And so I think what we're seeing here is there will be some working out. When it comes to states' rights, the law in Utah is very clear. Married couples may adopt and foster children. And Ms. Hoagland and Ms. Pierce, in this case, are legally married.
And of course, late this week, the judge reversed his own order. Your reaction, please, Ray.
A big relief. I am sure this is such a relief for this family. This baby will get to stay where she is, and the children in that state will be continued to be placed in loving families. Big sigh of relief.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie or Bay or at To the Contrary. From foster care to young women.
A record percentage of young women ages 18 through 34 are living with their families today, more than at any point since the 1940s. A new Pew report finds more than 1/3 of young women live with a parent or parents or with relatives. Compared to the young women of the 40s, women today are much more likely to forego early marriage and go to college. The share of young women in such living situations fell steadily from 1940 until 1960. It has been slowly rebounding ever since, before shooting up during the Great Recession. The rate of young men going back home grew in that time period as well to just above 40%, but the rate hasn't surpassed its high of nearly 48% in the 1940s.
Welcome, Sam Bennett. We have missed you.
Great to be here.
So why is this happening? Why is everybody moving
Well,
home?
remember, I've got my PhD in raising daughters, right? Emma's 31 and Rachel's 29 now, both through college, married beautifully, grandchildren, grandpuppies, the whole 9 yards. But I would put my finger on student debt. The fact that my daughter, one of my daughters, Rachel, had a student loan, the bank shall go unnamed, that required her to pay $600 a month with no forbearance and no forgiveness at all. And we blame ourselves. We just made this assumption that the same student loans that my husband and I had access to, because we both didn't have any money, our parents couldn't afford anything, we both worked our way through school and graduate school, that we just assumed that the student loans that were out there in the marketplace were the same student loans we had. Nothing could be further from the truth. I think that's the single biggest reason.
What's the difference?
The difference is there are student loans out there now in the marketplace, and I know Congresswoman Carol Maloney has actually been working on this issue. Like Chase would say, okay, you're graduated, pay up. There's no forbearance, there's no forgiveness, there's no federal underwriting or connection with it at all.
Well, because there was, quite frankly, a lot of fraud with the student loans. I mean, there were people I knew when I was in college of people who didn't really need student loans taking them out so they could pay.
And that very well
pay
may
for college
be, but I got to tell you,
the
unintended consequence of all of this is I would put my finger on that as the single biggest reason for ballooning student debt, the single biggest reason for default, and the single biggest reason, particularly young women, are staying home in record numbers.
What kind of rates are they getting?
Awful. I mean, I created a whole matrix and a binder with all the things for both of my daughters because we assumed a lot of debt for their education, but we felt it was important for them to have a part of it. And it was startling to me. I'm like, wait a minute. I co-signed a loan that was 8% interest for a student loan in this low interest environment. Did I actually do that? And so, in truth, I blame myself, buyer beware, but it's an awful situation that needs to be addressed. I love what Elizabeth Warren has been talking about student debt. But anyway, I think and both my daughters, neither one of them came home. They both survived out there, one in Silicon Valley and the other one in New York City with the highest rents in the country. And I'm very proud of them. They both made it. But I can tell you right now, there's a lot that probably can, and I think student loan is the biggest culprit.
As someone who went home after college without a job, I returned from graduation and moved right into my parents' home. I needed the coaching that my parents provided. I needed the support, whether it was financial for the short term. And I think it was a really positive thing. People are baffled by this. That, why we're returning to numbers of the 1940s, that women are staying home in droves, these millennial women, why are they moving back? And I don't think it's that surprising given that there are not enough jobs out there for us, the economic opportunities. And I graduated college a decade ago. So even though people say the economy's gotten better in the past 5 years, it certainly hasn't made much of a difference when we're seeing these numbers return to nearly 40%. I think it's a positive thing that women are staying at home to get a little help, get a little padding before they go out into the real world and have to deal with these high rents in certain areas, such as this metropolitan Washington area. And I don't think it's a bad thing. We're delaying marriage also. We should also remember that. That's a huge reason. Millennial women we kind of believe in the one, and we'll wait for the one. We won't settle.
Your thoughts?
I think that there are also a lot of non-economic reasons that young women are staying home. Social scientists now say that there is a whole new phase between adolescence and adulthood. And that phase is called the Odyssey. And it takes place in the 20s. And it's this period of exploration where young people try to find themselves. And this never really happened in the past. But we have people now like Sheryl Sandberg who keep impressing upon young women this idea that career paths should be a jungle gym, not a ladder. So I think that period of exploration also accounts for this new trend of young women staying home.
But the way I was raised, I remember thinking if you didn't at least make some big strides in your 20s to where you wanted to go, you weren't going to get there. And it's just as true for women as it is for men.
Yeah. Well, you know, I really appreciate the points that Rina was making, and I think we should not despise these family connections. In our culture, we don't do enough to prize them, I don't think, and we can learn a lot from other cultures in their intergenerational communication and living arrangements and so on. So that's a good thing. To the degree that higher ed is contributing to it, I think you raised a great point, Sam. I'd like to go even beyond the student loans back to the cost of college to begin with, and what's causing that to escalate.
Exactly.
And is higher ed, packaged as it is now, at the cost it's packaged at, is that serving women well for the desires they have?
It's not serving anybody well.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous, but what can you do about it?
Well, you can unitize it a lot differently and allow people to get credits from different institutions, make them compete against each other for your dollar, and let women time that on their life cycle, according to the relationships they want to have. Maybe they don't want to be delaying marriage as much as is happening these days. Maybe they want to. So let women organize their higher education around their commitments and desires.
And if I can jump in as a parent, right, a recent parent with my daughters graduating, I hear what you're saying. I don't disagree. I came from nothing. I was a Regent Scholar in New York. I could pick any state school I wanted to, and I got free tuition. Right? But I also know, going through that experience, that being in the workforce, that my daughters would have been better served when they went out into the workforce if they had a private college degree. I felt that very firmly. My husband and I both knew that we had the income to help support that decision. That doesn't mean that's the only option out there. But I think both of you said something I think is really, really important. This generation is all about family connections, way more than we were. And I noticed this with my own children and how much we're involved in their lives and their children's lives. So I agree with both of you on that point.
It's a friendship
all right,
now,
we
right?
got to go. Behind the headlines, the movie currently playing in theaters is about women's struggle for the vote, but it's not the American story. It's about suffragettes in the UK. We spoke with the film's director about her journey to tell this story.
As our writer said when we went into these male executives to sell it, we had to say, you know, this is a kick-ass movie with explosions to try and convince them that it was worth making. But I think that the momentum behind feminism, the resurgence in a way that we're at the moment of people reclaiming and talking about feminism, and you know, men and women in the UK, there's this new kind of activism, and I see it happening here too.
The film is set in London during the early 19-teens. Director Sarah Gavron says she wanted to make this film because the British suffragette movement is largely an untold story, just a footnote in history books.
We read all these accounts of these women who sacrificed so much, such personal costs, so they'd lose, you know, jobs and homes and relationships with their family, and their children would get taken away. And they had no parental rights, so they had no recourse. You know, women had no rights over their children at all in that period, which seems extraordinary, doesn't it?
And this was not a peaceful revolt.
There's this incident called Black Friday where the government ordered the police to go in and brutally attack the women, and they threw them to the ground and they kicked them repeatedly, and you know, and they also force-fed them, which we now know is a form of torture. But also conversely, the women started to commit civil disobedience. There was 40 years of peaceful protest, during which there was an effective press blockade and just a series of broken promises by the government, and they got nowhere. And then they turned gradually to civil disobedience, smashing windows and eventually even placing explosives in homes. They never targeted human life, but they did attack property.
The movie includes a timeline showing when women got the vote in countries around the globe. Actor and women's rights advocate Meryl Streep plays a small but important role of Emmeline Pankhurst, who is the leader of the movement.
Meryl Streep is extraordinary. She's really down to earth. You know, I thought I would be really intimidated, but she doesn't allow that to happen. She showed up for this one sequence, and she very generously spent a whole nother night doing off-screen voice stuff, so the people in front of her had something to respond to. She really didn't need to do that. And she's just been a great ambassador for this film because she's such an advocate generally, and she's a tireless campaigner. I mean, when we have breaks, you know, when we're going around doing press, she'll be writing to Congress. I mean, she never ceases to campaign.
Gavron also knows about inequality in the movie industry, but she wanted her movie to make a statement not only on screen, but off screen too.
Films by women and about women aren't often made. I mean, 1 to 10% of films are directed by women each year, and it's more like 1%. On this, we had a female two producers, a writer, me as director, and then a whole team of female heads of department, as well as many women in front of the camera. So it was really reversing the balance.
But in a business where box office is king, will this story be a commercial success?
In unprecedented numbers, women have been going to the cinema, and generations of women. So you're getting grandmothers and daughters and, granddaughters going together. And also saying, the response has been a lot of people saying, I'll never not use my vote again. I just hope it reaches the broadest possible audience, men as well as women, because I think it's not only got a message about sexual inequality, but about general inequality. And that's one of the big issues of today.
So, Rina, will the show succeed at the box office in the U.S.?
It's hard to tell. Are people interested in seeing a movie that is entirely about the subject of women in our movement? I'm not entirely sure. But one thing it does is sheds light on an important thing, is that we need to level the playing field when it comes to women's representation in this country. We've come a long way, but certainly not far enough. And I think there's going to be many things that need to happen in the coming years. I'm proud to be part of an organization known as Representation 2020 that is looking to achieve gender parity in our political system by that year. I don't think we will until we level the playing field with electoral systems and with recruitment systems to get more women in office representing this demographic.
I was surprised. My husband suggested last weekend that we go see it. I was recovering from a trip to Africa, so I didn't have enough energy, but I think we're going to go see it this weekend. Will other men want to see it?
I don't know. My husband's all about it, but he's a big Hillary supporter. But I have to just, if I could, I think you hit the nail on the head perfectly. Women got the right to vote. It took 150 years to get there. I think it's very important to remind people it took that long. But what we haven't done is we haven't stepped up to run for office ourselves. And the yawning chasm we have right now that's so destructive is we don't have nearly enough Republican women running for office, right? As you've had this sort of slow increase of Democratic women, we've had, in serving in the U.S. Congress and state legislators, we've had an equal exacerbation of Republican women serving. And that has been enormously deleterious. So I'm really looking forward to this movie.
Well, why is that? I mean, is it because, there's a huge problem within the Republican Party right now. The leadership is not at all happy with the two frontrunners in the presidential polls. Yeah. They want more, typical candidates who've held elective office before. But why is how's it filtering down to women?
The research that I've done on this particular subject, I think there's two things going on. One is the Democrats, for whatever reason, have actually been doing more. So the contrast is what you see. So back in 1974, we had an equal number of Republican and Democratic women serving, 4%, all right? And since then, you've had this slow gain by the Democrats, and you've had a little bit of gain by the Republicans, and then you've had this sort of downward spiral going on. I think the big issue is there's a contrast. The Democrats, for whatever reason, look at Emily's List or some other organizations. You have Susan B. Anthony
Yes.
Fund, right, on the right, or the Republican, I shouldn't say the right, the Republican side. The other issue, I think, is there's some things afoot on the state level. Where Democrats seem to be doing a better job of recruiting women to run at a state legislature level. And, of course, the state legislature is the bench for U.S. Congress. So I think the issue is more an issue of contrast. And I just want to make sure that both these women across from the table from me run for elected office.
Is she endorsing?
But will this movie spur more Republican women?
I think it'll spur conversation. And in truth, in at least America, the suffragists were primarily Republican.
It's very interesting, the pro-life history of the suffragette movement. Susan B. Anthony List, you named that. Susan B. Anthony List exists to bring conservative and pro-life women into statewide and federal office. And so there's a deep history there. Susan B. Anthony was also very close to Frederick Douglass and helped the black vote along and so on. So just, I loved the line in the interview here that I will never not use my vote again.
Nice.
That's tremendous, that we have a sense of stewardship of what we've received, that we prize it, and that we allow for the diversity of women's voices to come into the public square. That's, I think, what's going to be really important. We don't say there's one woman's position. There's a diversity of positions. Your table exudes that.
Yeah, I think this movie is going to do very well because there's a real hunger right now to learn women's stories, to learn women's history. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney has pushed for a women's museum commemorating our history in the nation's capital. And the story of Alice Paul is very significant and is just coming to the forefront right now. And she learned all of her tactics from the British suffragettes and brought it to America. And that's why we have the right to vote here.
All right, go watch your history in the making on the movie screen this weekend. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary. See you next week.
Guy with the cards, the old cards.